A hunter is locked in a battle for life and death with an endangered European brown bear. But his fight to survive goes beyond the mountains and enters the courtroom as hunters and wildlife activists clash in a frenzy. The Montvallier Nature Reserve is a preserved area in the Pyrenees Mountains. Pyrenees, a mountain range that separates France and Spain. Known for its diverse flora and fauna, it's a popular destination for hikers and wildlife enthusiasts, offering scenic landscapes and opportunities to observe protected species. One of those protected species is the European brown bear. The reserve, located in the Couserans region of the Ariège-Pyrénées in France, is a haven for wildlife. It is a refuge for brown bears. But just across its border is a designated hunting zone, and sometimes the lines become blurred. On 20 November 2021, 81-year-old hunter Andre Reeves joined 15 others on a wild boar hunt. It was something the group of friends had been doing for years. It was something they all enjoyed, getting out in nature, tracking the wild boar, and hopefully coming home with a good haul. But this day was different. As Andre, following the telltale signs of wild boar, tracking their trails over the mountainous terrain and heading for a potential vantage point, he failed to notice something very important. It was the markings on the trees. These were used to mark the boundary of the Montvallier Nature Reserve, a forbidden territory for hunters. Whether Andre and the rest of the group merely ignored this boundary as they were hot on the trail of some wild boar, or they genuinely missed the signage remains to be seen. But at some point that morning, they crossed into the nature reserve. Not only that, but Andre was walking straight into danger. Unbeknown to him, one of the most ferocious predators in Europe was heading his way. And it wasn't alone. As Andre peered through the trees, searching for further signs of the wild boar, he heard a distinctive rustle over his shoulder. He glanced around, and that's when he saw them. A couple of brown bear cubs. They were ambling over the fallen leaves, rooting around in the soil. They hadn't yet picked up the hunter's scent. Andre stopped in his tracks and marveled at the two youngsters. He loved wildlife, and seeing this protected species up close was a privilege. The bears had made a comeback to the region over the past few decades. Local farmers had been outraged with reported attacks on their livestock, whilst wildlife conservationists had seen the bear's return as a monumental success story. Andre lowered his rifle and then crouched down, making himself as small as possible. He knew that the mother wouldn't be far away, and he didn't want to be seen as a threat. But it was too late. The mother had already spotted him. Andre's heart lurched in his chest as his eyes met the sow's. He could see her brown eyes staring directly at him, and he instinctively knew what she was thinking. Straight away, he knew he was in trouble. With two cubs, the female was at her most protective. Without warning, she ran at Andre, thundering over the ground, covering the gap in seconds. Andre could see the bear's fur rippling on her immense body, her characteristic shoulder hump and powerful front legs pounding over the ground just feet from where he crouched. Andre braced himself for the hit. The bear grabbed his left thigh. Its teeth sunk into his flesh, tearing through his clothing and skin. Andre felt the pressure build and watched in horror as the bear shook her head from side to side. He was still standing at this point, but was soon knocked off his feet, hitting the ground with a hard thud. The bear then dragged him several feet along the forest floor. He was like a rag doll, and feeling the bear's sheer power was humbling. Time seemed to stand still as the battle commenced. Luckily, Andre was still clutching his hunting rifle. With nothing else to protect himself, he brought his rifle around, pointed at the sow, and squeezed the trigger. The bear immediately backed away. She had been momentarily stunned by the impact of the bullet, but she hadn't finished yet. She hadn't neutralized the threat to her cubs. She growled, a deep, guttural growl, a sound Andre will never forget. It sent shivers through his body. The cubs had scarpered when they heard the loud crack from the gun, disappearing amongst the trees, and the mother came back for more. This time she moved around to the other side of Andre and bit down on his right calf. At first there was no pain. The adrenaline searing through his body was masking it. The pain would come later. The hunter scrabbled about on the ground, trying to get away, trying to pull himself free from her vice-like grip. Andre only had one choice, so he lifted his rifle and fired a shot. This time the bullet pierced the bear's heart and lungs, and she crumpled to the ground next to Andre. Other hunters in the party had heard the commotion and came running. The first to arrive saw Andre sitting on the ground holding his left thigh. Blood pooled around him. It was clear that he was in a state of shock. Next to him lay the sow. Both his legs had been fractured in the rapid attack, and he had an open artery. There was every chance that he would bleed out right then and there. Luckily, however, his fellow hunter who rushed to his aid was a volunteer firefighter. He had been trained for situations like this and remained calm and composed as he tended to Andre's injuries. He tied a makeshift tourniquet around his leg, pulling it tight to stem the bleeding. It was this action that likely saved Andre's life. Then they called the emergency services. There was no way the 81-year-old could hike out of there in the condition he was in, so a helicopter was sent to retrieve him. The whirring of the helicopter blades echoing through the valley was a welcome sound, and moments later, Andre was airlifted to hospital where he was patched up. But his battle had only just begun. When word got out that Andre had shot and killed a bear, the true extent of the drama unfolded. Wildlife officials found that the hunting party had been hunting illegally. They were inside the reserve and therefore outside the designated hunting zone. Not only that, but Andre had killed Caramels, a well-known breeding sow who played a vital role in keeping the local population stable. It was a devastation for bear conservationists who had fought so hard to bring this species back from the brink of local extinction. The loss of brown bears from the Pyrenees was turned around in the 1990s when France imported the apex predator from Slovenia. Slowly but surely, their numbers have been increasing, and they now exist in a delicate balance within the ecosystem. But Andre had upset that balance. Not only had he killed an important sow in a population of only around 80 individuals, but in all likelihood the cubs wouldn't survive without their mother either. As news broke of the incident, conservationists and hunters clashed. Andre and his fellow hunters pleaded self-defense, whilst conservationists said that the group were illegally hunting inside the reserve. They never should have been there in the first place. In fact, all 16 hunters were in trouble. They had been caught hunting 1,300 feet outside the authorized hunting area, and all faced prosecution for their actions. On Tuesday, March 18, 2025, Andre was summoned before the judge in the city of Foix in the Ariège department in southwestern France. Both wildlife activists and hunters staged demonstrations outside the courtroom, each group with their own beliefs on what should happen to the old-time hunter. The prosecution requested a 4-month suspended prison sentence for Andre, along with a 2-year ban on carrying weapons and the suspension of his hunting license. Additionally, they sought fines for all 16 hunters involved in the unauthorized hunt, and the fines were going to be very high. Alice Terrasse, the lawyer representing several environmental associations at the trial, said, "We want the fault to be acknowledged and compensation for the environmental damage. At the very least, a bear must be reintroduced to compensate for Caramels' death," she said, saying such an operation would cost 100,000 euros, the equivalent to $109,000. Although the court trial has concluded, at the time of making this video, a final verdict has not yet been delivered. What do you think? Should Andre be prosecuted for what happened, despite acting in self-defense, or should he be punished for hunting inside the reserve in the first place?